And today's video is about how to make the best M13 class possible. And this is part of a series that I started a few weeks ago. Started with the MP5, then did the M4, then the Growl, then the MP7, and now today's we're going to be covering the M13. So what I'm going to talk about in today's video is the overall different attachments that we have on the M13, and then also talk a little bit about what each of the attachments do so you know how to make a better class setup for yourself, regardless if you're playing multiplayer, 6v6, Ground War, 10v10, Warzone. You're going to be able to make a class setup that makes sense for you and how you like to play using the weapon. In addition to that, we're also going to talk a little bit about the different recoil patterns depending on which attachments you equip, as well as where this fits in the individual meta when it comes to Warzone, time to kill, all that type of stuff. And we'll also talk about how we figure out all this information. I'm not sure which one I'm going to be doing next in the series, but if you have a preference, make sure you comment that down below. I will be putting a poll down on the community tab in the community tab section on the channel. If you do enjoy the video or find it helpful, make sure you do hit the like button. Goal in today's video is going to be 2,000 likes. You guys have been shattering it within like 6 hours. So let's see if we can do that again with this video. And if you're brand new, looking to find your way back for whatever reason, because you're part of that 88% that just hasn't yet subscribed, make sure you do subscribe with notifications on so you'll be able to find your way back for more Modern Warfare content. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is the monolithic suppressor versus these other attachments. Obviously, you could use other suppressors. You could use the lightweight one that's going to slow you down by 1 frame and then give you that sound suppression. Lightweight suppressor will actually nerf your damage range, so it's not all that viable, even though there's no penalty to the aim down sight time. The one that people generally go with is the monolithic suppressor because it's going to help you with range, sound suppression, so you stay off the minimap, especially in Warzone. Not as important in multiplayer because of the way the map design is. Gunfire doesn't show up. All those types of things, doesn't play like a traditional COD, so obviously suppressors aren't as important. And then the aim down sight penalty is normally about 1.5 frames. Some weapons it's 1, some weapons it's 2, but general rule of thumb, it's going to be about 1.5 frames depending on what weapon you're dealing with. Next thing we'll go ahead and talk about is the overall barrels, and there's actually different barrels, and we're going to be taking a look primarily at the Tempest Cyclone and the Marksman. One of the benefits with the Cyclone is it's actually going to include the suppression, and it'll take the spot of the monolithic suppressor, which you can see there. You will not be able to put anything there. As far as the Tempest Marksman, that's something you'll be able to combine with the monolithic, and you can see you're going to get range, velocity, recoil control. We're going to see how much all of those different things are and how these all compare and make it as simple as possible. This is a 1 frame penalty, means it'll slow you down by that 1 frame. And then this one right here is going to be a 2 frame penalty. So you got to kind of add those up as we go along, and it'll make more sense as we complete the whole picture. As far as underbarrels go, we're going to look at the Merc foregrip, which has a 1 frame penalty for recoil control and hip fire accuracy. Commando, no aim down sight penalty, but we do have recoil stabilization, which is the side to side, and we'll see how impactful that is. And then we'll go ahead and talk about the Ranger, which is a 1 frame penalty for recoil control and aiming stability, which we know kind of just helps out with that idle sway. Not all that important. Again, 1 frame penalty. Next up is the Operator foregrip. Only recoil control, and it doesn't even look like it does much once we get into the recoil patterns, but it's a 2 frame penalty, which might be worth it on other weapons, but in my opinion, probably not worth it on the M13. As far as ammunition goes, so there's 3 different ones, but the primary ones we're going to be talking about today are the blackout rounds as well as the 60 round mags. The blackout rounds are supposed to increase damage, no visible tracers, so when you fire, they don't know exactly where it's coming from. And then it also has no death skulls, so wherever they killed them, it's not going to pop up with the death skull. Con is bullet velocity, so that means if someone's farther away, it's going to be a little bit harder to hit those shots. And this kind of counters that damage range that you're getting from the pros, because anytime we're losing bullet velocity, that's also going to be a range reduction, which we'll go ahead and look at that as well. And then recoil control, this will give you slightly more recoil. As far as 60 round mag, it's going to slow down your movement, but no additional aim down sight time. Even though it says it there, that's a lie. We got the stipple grip that improves your aim down sight by 1 frame. Then we also have the rubberized grip, which is going to help recoil control at the cost of aiming stability. No additional aim down sight speed penalty. Laser sight, we can go usually with the tac laser, standard 2 frame faster aim down sight. So with no stock, we're going to have a little bit faster mobility as well as having a faster aim down sight of 2 frames at the cost of aiming stability, which is the idle sway, and recoil control, which you'll see from the recoil patterns there is a little bit more. FSS close quarter stock is going to be 1 frame faster at the cost of aiming stability, so this one's all around good if you don't want any downsides. So the skeleton stock ends up being a very good attachment, especially when you're comparing it to the no stock attachment. It's still going to give you 2 frames faster aim down sight, but instead of having faster mobility, you have faster strafe speed without the penalty of the recoil control issue. And as you'll see from this, it actually ends up helping the recoil slightly. And then another one we're going to talk about as a side note is the VLK optic. This is actually my favorite optic to run on this weapon, and it ends up having a 1 frame penalty as far as ADS speed, but it will actually help with the recoil, which is kind of odd. An optic shouldn't really be able to do that. A lot of times you would think it's placebo, but it ends up actually reducing the recoil, as we'll see from those recoil patterns. So we have those basic stuff. Let's go ahead and add on to the stats here. Right now you can see that the base damage on the M13 is 2419. That means up closer ranges, it'll be 24 damage, pretty much anywhere the body except for the head. And then after it hits a certain point, it'll drop off down to 19 damage. Headshots, 36 within the same range. And then once it drops off, it'll drop down to 28. In core game mode, it's going to be 5 to 6 shots to kill. If you throw in some headshots in there, you could drop it as low as 3 to 4 shots. And that ends up being 260 milliseconds up to 325. And then right there, you can see it drops down when you get those headshots involved. As far as Warzone full plated player, it's going to be 11 to 14 shots. And keep in mind, this is going to be a very important number. If you land some headshots in the mechs, it'll be 7-9, and that means primarily landing headshots. You can see the time to kill, 650 all the way up to 845. This is the number that is probably the most important when it comes to the M13 and adds to that melt factor, especially if you're able to land those headshots even at those further ranges. So as far as the individual ranges on the M13, the base weapon has a 33 meter range. We're going to check out what that looks like in game. We have the Cyclone, which will give you 37. That's the one that gives you added bullet velocity, built-in suppressor. So this is actually probably one of my favorites, probably when it comes to multiplayer, but still doesn't have all that oomph that the marksman rifle is going to give you, especially with the monolithic suppressor. And then you can kind of see how that stacks up. The marksman's going to give you 43, which is a 30% increase on top of the range. If you include the marksman with the monolithic, you're going to get 47 meters, which is right around that 42% mark. Blackout rounds by themselves will give you a 15% increase. This used to look like a lot more before they actually increased the range on the M13 a while back. This used to be a 30 meter, so it ended up jumping it up closer to like 20-25%. But obviously with this one, they changed that range, but they didn't actually affect the blackout rounds and how they work with the individual weapon. If you want the maximum range possible, you can stack the marksman with the monolithic with the blackout rounds, and you can get up to 55 meters, which is a 67% increase on the 33 meter range. So this is what 33 meters looks like in game. Here's 37 meters. Just a little bit further, you can see where this tag is kind of towards the center of the screen. 43 meters, 47 meters, 38 meters, and 55 meters. So that's incredibly far, but we're going to see that's not really viable within Warzone as we actually get into a little bit more of the breakdown and talk a little bit more about my opinions on the weapon. Now we're going to talk about what I think is a lot of people's favorite parts is the individual recoil patterns. This takes a little bit of time to get together, and I've actually added some more functionality, kind of help you out if you take screenshots so you kind of have an idea of what the attachments are doing in addition to the actual recoil patterns. If you have any other suggestions, make sure you comment those. I typically read all my comments so I can go ahead and find a way to incorporate that in the video. So what we're looking at here is the base recoil pattern here, and you can kind of see it just kind of goes a little bit up and kind of diagonally to the right. Nothing crazy there. The blackout rounds, you can see that they end up doing the kind of the same pattern, but it does go a little bit higher and a little bit further to the right. If we're looking at this comparison here on this middle one, you can see it goes up diagonally and hitches and touches kind of the middle of the zero, the right side of it. If we look at this one, it goes all the way over and almost touching the 2. So there is a little bit of a difference, especially when you're elongating the range. You're going to see a more noticeable difference to the recoil pattern. The Tempest Cyclone, this is the one with the more bullet velocity, but it doesn't necessarily supposed to help out the recoil all that much. You can see it kind of does the exact same pattern as here, maybe a little bit sharper angle here, but really not too big of a difference. The Tempest Marksman, this is one that's giving you the maximum range without the suppressor. You can see that it definitely does up and to the right, but this is cutting down on the recoil. Definitely noticeable if you're comparing it to these three. Right here, you can see that the 250 millisecond aim down sight time, 0 penalty there, 1 frame, 2 frames. So hopefully that kind of helps you out. Merc does an amazing job. You can see how much tighter this is. It's kind of probably the best one if we're kind of looking at a quick glance. And then we got the Commando, which is 0 frame, Ranger, kind of tighten it up. Commando's pretty good too. It kind of just makes it at an angle, but you're not getting that penalty. So kind of got to experiment and see how it feels, because once you start stacking attachments, it can feel pretty slow on a weapon if you're not used to it. The Ranger foregrip, we got the Operator, which doesn't look like you're getting a ton of benefit. Rubberized, you can see it's kind of helping out just a little bit, kind of straightens it out. For the most part, you're not getting a huge bonus there, but you're also not getting any kind of penalty. No stock, you can see it kind of adds on. It kind of ends up looking like you have blackout rounds on there. The comparison, it's maybe not as tight. You can see these kind of stay closer together versus these ones kind of spread out and bounce around a little bit. Skeleton stock kind of looks like the basic one. Maybe there's a little bit of recoil reduction, but not much. You can see the VLK, which actually surprised me. I know a bunch of people had said it for certain weapons. I had tested it on other weapons, but I never saw anything quite as pronounced as this, where you're literally seeing it tighten up the recoil significantly. And then my class setup for the best Cyclone has 0 penalty, definitely a little bit more mobile, can be used in regular multiplayer, probably even ground war. But when it comes to the Warzone class, it's going to make a little bit more sense why you're having a little bit slower aim down sight, and you're getting the tightest spread possible, as you can see right here. So these are pretty much the 5.56 rifles that people use in game. You got the M4, the Ram, the Growl, the M13, and the Kilo. And this graph is done with all the longest barrels to try and get the maximum range possible. Time to kill is on the left in milliseconds. We talked about that a little earlier. And this is the distance in meters. What you can see is the M13 is the least competitive out of the bunch, all the way up to about 40 meters. Then it kind of has a little bit of an advantage just in this little gap right here between around 37 meters up to about 42 meters. So it's not even all that great. And then it drops off, and then it ends up being pretty bad all the way until all the other weapons start to drop off. Then it kind of becomes a contender with the Growl right around that 70 meter mark. And that's why it doesn't actually fare too well in these closer range engagements. And just to simplify this a little bit easier, I've kind of split this up for you. This is all of them versus each other. Including, you can see the Ram has the fastest TTK in this area among all the rifles, and the M13 only dominates the category once you get above that 80 meter range, which is absolutely ridiculous. So just keep that in mind when you get into a gunfight, that pretty much every other rifle that's 5.56 is going to outgun you. So first class setup we're going to take a look at is for the multiplayer. This is a class setup I'd probably use because ADS time is a little bit more important. Engagements are a little bit closer, so you don't need the slowest, longest reach with the weapon. So you can go with the actual Cyclone barrel, which doubles as a suppressor. Under barrel, I'd still go with the Merc foregrip. Ammunition, we can go the blackout rounds because you can get multiple downs. If you're playing 10v10, maybe ground war, maybe you go to the 60 round mag. It kind of just depends on your overall preference and how often you're going to be having to reload. Next thing up is you can actually go with the stock. I would go with the skeleton stock. And then for the rear grip, if you want to maintain that 0 penalty, you can go with the rubberized, and this is a 0 penalty. So it's just as fast as it is with 0 attachments, which is 250 milliseconds. But when it comes to Warzone, it's going to be completely different. The number one thing I recommend is a 60 round mag, since it takes between 11 to 14 shots to kill a player if you're landing primarily body shots. It is very important that you have enough ammo to down multiple players, and that is one of the drawbacks with this weapon. If you're kind of meshing it up with the Growl and the M4, which both have 60 round mags but killing less bullets, you're probably better off if this weapon had like a 70 round mag. Then it would be very competitive with each of those individual weapons in terms of downs per magazine. So 60 round I think is a non-negotiable, at least in my opinion, because if you're worried about mobility, you're probably going to have an SMG to go along with this to fill in the gap for those shorter ranges. Merc foregrip is still the way to go in my opinion. It's Tempest Marksman, and that only leaves us one attachment. If you like the iron sights, I would probably go with the skeleton stock, or I would go with stipple grip tape. Those are pretty much two different options. The skeleton stock's gonna give you a little bit faster aim down sight, which is gonna take care of the Tempest Marksman barrel. If you want the best accuracy possible and make it so this thing's like a laser beam, even though it's gonna have a little bit slower aim down sight time, the VLK is definitely the way to go. This is what I used on my testing when I showed it off on that little recoil control chart. So hopefully you found the video helpful. If you did, please remember to hit that like button. And if you're brand new to the channel, you're part of that 88% that hasn't yet subscribed, definitely make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you'll be able to find your way back to the channel. And if you'd like to suggest a weapon for the next how to make the best class setup possible video, make sure you leave that in the comment section below, as well as voting in the community tab when I have the poll set up. Appreciate all the support on the content. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.